to Adam's Cosmic Family. I'm your host, Adam Blum, and today we have an amazing guest, Braeden Pahl. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Braeden.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me here.
Oh, heck yeah. You are my first official guest, and I'm excited to see how this transpires. And thank you, audience, for joining me on my very first podcast. But before we dive into it, I just want you to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and whatever you feel like you need to share before we jump in.
Well, I was born and raised here in Tucson, Arizona, and I've had a interesting life in which I've had an interest in the paranormal, strange, and mysterious since as long as I can remember. And it's been partially compelled by events in my life that have left me questioning the nature of reality. So. Um, I grew up with divorced parents. Um, it was challenging at times, but absolutely love both of my parents, and I'm very grateful for all the life experiences they provided me with.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And we're just going to go right in if you're ready.
Absolutely.
All right, let's do it. So let's just start with the younger part of your life. About what age do you recall feeling as if you were either, say, not from this world, so to speak, or like at one point in your life were you feeling like you were out of place or maybe different from people who are about your age?
But since as long as I can remember, when I was very young, I actually was diagnosed with ADHD and put on medication for that. Um, but uh, without my, unbeknownst to me, had definitely some attributes that are on the spectrum, the spectrum of ASD. And well, that probably caused some of my feelings of not belonging, but I never was very adept socially. So I spent a lot of time when I was a child in the library reading books.
Okay, all right. And do you refer yourself to as like a star seed? Do you feel like you're a star seed? And if so, can you explain to the audience what a star seed actually is in your terms?
Absolutely. I think I'm a starseed. I think a starseed, put simply, is just a soul that comes from another star system incarnating into this star system um, to really see knowledge, to create a shift in consciousness, as it were. And um, I would always look up at the sky at night when I was a young kid. I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. I felt like I was on the wrong planet.
Hmm.
Um, and um, I never really knew why until I got older. I started to have some experiences, flashbacks to a place that I had never experienced in my lifetime here on Earth. So, um, the starseed, to put simply, is just someone who comes from a distant place who incarnates here on Earth um, for the purpose of uh, changing consciousness.
Beautiful, beautiful. And do you recall a time in your life where, like, your very first, say, dream or experience that seemed like it was off-world? Like, was it something that you experienced as a very young child or in your young adult life?
It was more when I got into middle school is when I started having sort of these visions of this other place and remembering the way of life in that place and how different it was from here on Earth. Everything from society to the way that people felt and viewed life was entirely different than the way that we view and see life here on Earth. But I had experiences in my childhood leading up to that. When I was very, very young, um, I would often, when I fell asleep, leave my body and I would appear as these geometric shapes and I'd move around on the floor of my bedroom um, as these shapes after I left my body. So I would have experiences like that, or sometimes I would see um, beings or people uh, interact with me that no one else really seemed to notice. So um, it was interesting growing up.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Would you like to share any memories that you had or recall with the audience here that you recall from other lifetimes on other planets or other timelines or even this planet?
Absolutely. Since my childhood, I have done hypnotic regressions to see if there was any information I could glean. I've remembered through those uh, regression sessions um, that I was on a planet in what we'd call the Alcyon star system in the Pleiades. And I remember being a diplomat. I remember there being this world absolutely filled with life. It was like a rainforest over the entire planet, with mostly made up of a single landmass with disparate pockets of water, significantly less water than here on Earth. And I remember the ecosystem there being um, completely symbiotic. That all the life forms, there was no predation. It was a symbiotic ecosystem. There were tree-like um, beings there, um, very very tall, and there were these what I would almost describe as giant hummingbirds that were probably uh, about for us about 3 feet tall. Um, and I remember that the civilization I was a part of, it was a humanoid species with blonde hair, um, and looked very Nordic. And we lived inside this sentient crystalline city. Um, it was sort of phased out of the local reality. It like could pass through um, apparently solid objects, and it's kind of like an envelope hiding the city in a just a little bit outside of the spectrum for the physical interactions to happen. And I remember this city would reconfigure itself just based on your thoughts. If you needed a place to sit down, a place would appear. The structure itself would shift and materialize a chair for you. Um, and I remember that we didn't eat any organic food. We consumed this crystalline slurry, and it was uh, what powered our cells. Um, I remember that we had a very large reach, that our goal was to be gardeners of life, to cultivate and shepherd it in any way we could, um, in a way that was done out of altruistic intent. Um, and uh, there was very much a higher science of consciousness. It was a daily part. There was no verbal language or communication. Um, it was all telepathic. It was mind to mind, experience to experience. Um, and there was this sense while being there that you were totally encased and enveloped in this love. Um, it it's really hard to describe. It's as if there was like a tangible blanket of love that wrapped you all the way down to the core of your being. Um, and in this lifetime, I was a diplomat. I worked for the a council in the Pleiades as a diplomat to other worlds. Um, and um, I remember that the council chamber was actually above the planet. It was in a room that had no walls or ceilings or anything like that. It looked like you could just float off into space. It was a circular area with a bunch of different chairs, with different beings sitting down, and there'd be this one long hallway connecting to that chamber, and you just walk across this walkway, almost in space. Is what it felt like, and you talk to the different members of this council who were older and wiser individuals. Um, it was very interesting, very different from the way that we do things, and it sounds so bizarre. There was no concept of money. There was no material scarcity. This civilization had achieved um, complete and total freedom from any kind of energy or material scarcity. Um, so the concept of even private ownership wasn't really a thing. Um, it was more of doing things for uh, just because they are good, just because they are just and kind.
Mm.
Um, and Um, there definitely were times when there'd be, negative emotions, but the way that these people and I handled it was very different from the way that we're used to here on Earth. Um, they viewed the experience as separate from their actual nature, and so if they experienced any kind of negative emotion, they examined it from a distance, with a lot of lightheartedness and humor almost. Um, it was like, yes, I see this thing, but it isn't me. It isn't really a part of me. It's just an experience, and it's a funny thing to experience. Like there was this inside joke about the cosmos almost, and very very vivid. Like that's one of the things that I remember is how real it felt. These memories that I had, um, and it's not the only memories I've had through my uh, hypnotic regressions. I've also experienced a lifetime here on Earth that I was able to through descriptions of the life that I saw in this regression, I determined was about um, 3.8 um, billion years ago on Earth, just when life was beginning to really start. Um, I saw these plant these plants that were barkless. It kind of looked like precursors to what we call trees now. And I saw ferns and other small life forms, um, some insects, things of that nature. Um, and I remember there was a single unifying continent at the time on Earth. And in the ocean, there was this beautiful, towering city just floating on the water. It had these large towers, and on the top of this one central tower, there was this big blue orb of energy just spiraling out energy. And I was this little blue being. I was exploring and examining the environment and the life. Um, and I remember there were these orbs that followed me. They kind of looked like they were made out of a liquid metal, undulating, pulsing. And when I wanted to go somewhere, the orb would flatten out into um, a oval, and I'd step through it, and I would appear where it was I intended to go. Um, so it was certainly an interesting experience. It was very vivid. Um, but yeah, those are some of the most prominent memories that I have of these various past lives.
That's fascinating stuff, man. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
That's a podcast in of itself. My next question is, do you personally recall what age when you started to talk to your parents about all this? Or is there something that they came to you for first where they had an experience or experiences that they shared with you that opened up the doorway for you to talk about what you were going through?
So I had always been very much interested in this kind of stuff. Um, my dad was not really all that open to it.
Okay.
My mom was um, also not super open to it until there was an event where my brother almost died, um, and it really changed the way that my mom looked at things. And at the time, I was really going through sort of a spiritual journey. Um, I was in middle school um, at the time, and I think I was 13, um, and or 14, somewhere in that age range. And that's when we started talking about this, when I started really getting interested in it. And my mom took an interest in it and started to help cultivate in some ways a pathway for me to interact with people who were more um, uh, engaged with spirituality. And so I met with one of her clients. Um, it was one of my birthday wishes was to meet one of her clients when I was 16, who was a psychic medium. And I've had these sort of intuitive knowings my entire life about certain things. I'd be in the library hearing about extraterrestrials crashing, and I would ask myself, why would they crash? They're so technologically advanced, they shouldn't necessarily crash.
Right.
And I got the answer in my mind that the reason they crashed was in part an evaluation of us as a species to see how we would react, what we would do with it. Or
Mm.
were we going to hide it away? Or were we going to use it to create weapons? Were we going to use it to better human life? Um, what would we do with it? And I think that this is sort of a part of the phenomena that people don't necessarily consider is um, how we are evaluated by these other civilizations that apparently exist.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And that could be why there's been so much suppression over the years. We just weren't, I guess, ready at the time, and they have to let us sort of evolve naturally as far as how we handle stuff like that. So it's kind of fascinating to know that the crashes were literally intentional and for the purpose of finding out how we would evolve out of that. All right, so that's pretty darn cool. Personally, which planet do you think, or timeline do you think or star system, you think you spent most of your lifetimes in?
I actually think I spent most of my time in a non-physical form.
Okay,
Um, I I I think that all of us are much older than we think or can even necessarily remember. There's something about our planet, maybe about the very structure of the universe, in which we forget the experiences we've had, um, to cultivate some sort of growth within us,
okay,
and the nature of what that is.
okay.
So, um, my understanding is that I spend most of my time in a non-physical form, but I feel very much at resonance with these previous lifetimes that I remember and that have been brought to my attention.
Awesome. Okay. And we were talking a little bit about this before we came on. 2026 and 2027, at least with the people that I've been following on the internet, social media, podcast, you name it, there seems to be a common denominator, common theme, and that is 26 is the year of alleged disclosure, whether it's fake or real, maybe a little bit of everything. And 27, there's allegedly some kind of event or events that might take place to help wake up humanity. And I know, there's a lot of speculation on how that's all going to be played out. Can you shed some light on what your gut is and what you have kind of thought about as far as how we're going to handle that and how that might even all play out for the next couple of years?
I think disclosure is a single defining thing is really ambiguous. You know, what counts as disclosure is completely different from person to person. Some people uh, won't necessarily believe or know that we're not alone unless they have a direct immediate interaction with the technology and beings. And even then, there's always a possibility of an air of skepticism. And um, I think the real question is, what does disclosure mean for us individually? What is our burden of evidence for disclosure of non-human intelligences? Um, I mean, if we look at the Drake equation, for instance, that in itself is disclosure. It's mathematic evidence that there most certainly that we're not alone in the universe, and that we're most certainly not the most advanced civilization in the universe. When you look at the sheer number of stars and planets that we can even begin to see, it's such an incomprehensible number that it is impossible for us to be the only life in the universe. Um, so I think that even something as simple as the Drake equation can count as disclosure, and I think even an admission from the government isn't necessarily going to convince everyone. Um, so I think it's not about any single defining moment, but rather how we as a species choose to change. Um, with the knowledge and the understanding that we're not alone? Do we choose to adopt that stance? Do we choose to pull our head out of the sand and realize, hey, there's probably a lot more in the universe going on than we currently have a grasp over? And um, I think I think there's going to be announcements by the government. I don't know what the extent of those announcements are going to be. If you look into the lore and history and what's really concrete in terms of documentation, there have been retrieval programs of non-human craft. There have been exploitation programs of non-human craft. Um, and a lot of those things have been moved into the corporate sector. And I don't necessarily think that we, as the American people, or even as the global community, are going to get the truth that is probably much more developed in the private sector than it is in our government. A lot of the people who worked in government retrieval programs in the past are no longer with us, unfortunately. And it complicates it. So I think there may be disclosure of there are non-human intelligences. I think there are a broad range of non-human intelligences visiting us. I think some are native to our planet. I think there are living plasma intelligences that are native to our planet. I think there are some that are not native to our planet. I think there's a trans-dimensional beings visiting us. I think that there are even potential futures of us visiting us. Um, and I think there's the other possibilities of being previously advanced civilizations on our planet that are still here, possibly of human origin. So I think that disclosure, it really it's about realizing that what we know as a species, what we think we know as a species, is really so little to what there is to know. And opening your mind, opening your consciousness to change, to adapt to new information, to be rigorous, um, but also to explore your own consciousness, your own nature as a person, and um, to go out and seek experiences, direct experiences, um, to create community that is dedicated to not only these cultivation of consciousness and understanding these experiences, but um, implementing them on a more broader societal level. If we understand that consciousness is a fundamental thing, um, it reshapes our relationship that we have with our planet. Right now, we view, from a corporate standpoint, as a finite planet with the potential for infinite growth monetarily, and that doesn't make sense unless you view all the resources of our planet as something that can be exploited and monetized and so on and so forth. And that's not going to be conducive to our future survival as a species. It's not going to be conducive to our evolution as a species. And uh, I think right now, with all the chaos in the world, we are at an inflection point where we can not necessarily one individual can go out there and change the world, but we can each take steps in our own communities, um, to really move away from these destructive principles and change as a people. And I think when we take that initiative to change our own consciousness, to change the way that we interact with our environment, the way we treat it, that um, beings that are altruistic in intention are going to be more willing to have contact with us and um, are going to be more willing to help us. I think it requires a change in ourselves as a species, before we necessarily get help.
Beautiful. And that actually leads me to my next question. You and I, and probably members of the audience, we talk about ascension. That seems to be a really hot topic lately. And so I guess this is a two-part question. Can you explain to the audience whether they're new or they are, familiar or unfamiliar to the ascension process? Can you explain what you think is ascension? And also, do you think that we'll just call them extraterrestrials, cosmic family members, are here to assist us with the ascension process with technology, or is it with their wisdom? Or is it through their dreams, or all the above? How do you think these beings themselves, which seem to be more common now than ever, are assisting us with this alleged ascension process?
Well, I think that ascension in the broad strokes term that people typically imagine it is um, not necessarily uh, the truth behind it. I don't think we're just going to be magically transported into a utopia.
Hmm.
I don't think that that's going to happen. I think ascension is a change in our consciousness again, a return to epistemic humility, and and a return to a more coherent state with our natural world. It's the reclaiming of wisdom of our forebears, um, who studied and loved and sought to take care of the natural world. And I think that ascension is simply a shift in consciousness rather than it being a necessarily physical process. I think it's a process of consciousness. And I think it's very clear from, you know, all the reports of different interactions with these non-human intelligences that consciousness is the main component to it all. That shift, people often have experiences, and those experiences, the memory of the experience is removed from their mind or veiled by other memories. And that demonstrates specifically an interaction with our own consciousness, whether it's in a subtle way, a change, an evolution in it, to be more open to something maybe we can't necessarily perceive with our ordinary senses. Um, I mean, as human beings, we're limited in what we can sense and perceive. Um, we don't see a majority of even the light spectrum. Um, and our brains aren't designed to necessarily tell us the truth about reality, but rather to allow us to survive in our world.
Okay. Okay. And I didn't have this question written down, but this is sort of like a thought that kind of occurred as you were talking. Do you think that as we raise our levels of consciousness as a human species, that we will be able to experience a little bit more or see a little bit more that's like right in front of us, that it's always been there, but in say like another dimension. And because we've reached that frequency that represents that dimension, that now we can see it, we can experience it, or is it something a little bit more complicated than that?
I absolutely think that's the case. I do think that it's a perceptive thing with our consciousness. When we develop these, when we develop our consciousness, when we know ourselves, we can begin to realize that there's a sense within us that is non-physical, and that sense will reveal to us things that our ordinary senses cannot. Um, and so I think that this process of a shift in consciousness will lead us to having more interactions with beings, and seeing more beings. I also think it's a byproduct of the state of our world. There are lots of planets out there with life, but I think that the fact our planet is teeming with life is a rarity and something that's special. Um, and I think that uh, a lot of beings are concerned about our stewardship over our planet, and are concerned with the survival and life making capacity of our planet. Um, and so I think it's also important to, again, take into account how we are measured. By what metrics and standards are we measured by more advanced civilizations, and non-human intelligences operating on our planet? Um, because it's a bigger picture than just our species. It's a bigger picture than any individual. Um, but with that understanding comes a possibility of us creating something that is positive and beneficial in terms of relationship with our planet and with these beings.
Awesome. Okay. Okay. Um, and this kind of goes back to what you're saying before about the alleged crashes that we had. Um, they obviously wanted to study and see how we reacted, as you had mentioned. But there's so many different theories out there, and it seems to be a significant amount of proof that we did reverse technology, some of the stuff that crashed here. And with that said, I guess my question is, do you think there was a reason to why it seems like the technology kind of came out later um, to the public, but that not all of the technology has come out? Do you think that some of the governments around the world, and we'll just for all intents and purposes, refer to them as shadow governments, were suppressing this technology because there was some nefarious reasons for that? Or was it just because they wanted to be the superpower? Or was there something that you want to share that led to them keeping that away from the public? Because it sounds like the ETs really had some advanced stuff in those craft. And I would venture to say that a lot of the good stuff, the cream of the crop, was hidden from the general population. No.
Well, I think so, but I think it's a complex, multipolar um, deal. I mean, if you look at it, there is the real concern that certain technologies could be weaponized. I mean, that's what our military was doing with it. And there's the concern that, we have adversaries, we have a multipolar world. We have corporations that require avenues to make money. Our entire system is based off of um, a scarcity of things, and that's how we derive value. And if you were to go out into the stars, let's say electrogravitic or gravitic propulsion systems came out, and 0 point energy systems came out. Um, would it be wise to do that? Should just anyone be able to leave our planet freely and go and interact with these other places when we ourselves aren't currently responsible? I mean, we look at our usage of nuclear weapons as a deterrent. I don't think that's uh, conducive to our long-term survival, pointing weapons of mass destruction at each other. Um, I think that there are some real concerns that are legitimate and serious. Um, do I think that there are avenues to release these things in a way that could benefit the public? I do. But you have to figure out how to balance that without totally destabilizing the entire world.
Mm,
Um, and really, the only solution I've come up with is that we have to rebuild community again. We have to be able to rely on one another. We have to be able to go to our neighbors, even though we're in the most polarized time in history, and set aside our differences and seek common goals, seek um, common purpose, and you know, rid ourselves of the limitations of our own definitions of ourselves and others, and to create something better, to strive for something better.
mm.
So I think that will allow these technologies to be used responsibly. Um, so I do think there is a real concern there. Also, at the time that these crashes were happening, a World War II era, right afterwards, you have the fear of communism, and it's my understanding based on the civilization I described being part of that would appear to look to our government as though communism works in space, and that would delegitimize our government structure at the time, and um, you know that is problematic. Um, I think logistically it's a challenge, and I think there are valid reasons for keeping this secret. Um, but I also think that no matter how much time passes, humanity isn't going to be ready in any single defining moment.
Mm.
Our history is fraught with evidence and proof that we adapt, we evolve when we are pressured to, when it's required of us for our survival to do that. And I think we're at that point now where our survival is in jeopardy, and we have to ask ourselves, how do we prevent this from happening? How do we take governments and build something that is not corruptible, over the time spans of thousands of years? How do we build stability? How do we create an avenue where we can continue to grow and develop mentally, morally, emotionally, and consciously, and eventually technologically as a species in a responsible manner. Um, so I do understand that these technologies have been kept from people for a very long time, and people are rightly upset. Um, but there is a bigger picture to all this, and I think it's important to understand that perspective, even if it's not one we agree with, because at the end of the day, we all share this planet together, and it'd be wise of us to learn to get along.
I agree. I agree. And so, you know, we've talked about this. Braden and I are part of a group called the Starseed Group here locally in Tucson, and I met him about a little over, I'd say about a year and a half ago. And there's lots of different theories on so many topics that we cover, and I just wanted to ask you, like, one of the things that I've always been concerned with, or not in a bad way, just in a I don't know, just in a curious way, like how many species out there do you think are, say, directly related to the human DNA? Are we all part of like some huge plan where there's like say 22 species or 20 species or 30 species that we're all kind of related to, where they just made us into this piece of clay and then things started happening? I mean, do you can you shed any light on what you believe with how we got here in relation to those ET beings?
Well, if we look at the fossil record, what's commonly accepted in mainstream science, you had a bunch of different hominid species existing around the same time in similar areas, which is really unusual for any species. It's not necessarily common that we see, um, a bunch of different offshoots um, in competition with each other in the same place. Um, the other thing is we're as hominids very ill suited to living out in the natural environment. We're hairless. We require technology, we require clothing, we require manipulation of our environment
Mm,
to survive at a fundamental level. And that's very different from the way that most life on Earth does. Most life forms here grow and exist in a form factor that's suitable to the environment that they're in without needing to manipulate it necessarily. And there's also the matter of our chromosome 2 fusion, which created an exponential increase in our intelligence. Even to this day, I mean, it's difficult to explain. So I think that the chromosome 2 fusion is very likely an artificial uh, modification of our genetics. Um, to what extent um, are we related to these other species? I can say I don't know, but I suspect that the answer is out there. You look at Bob Lazar's story, and he talks about how human beings were modified a great number of times genetically that they were able to achieve that kind of insight from looking at our genome, and that these beings allegedly said that human beings are vessels. And the implication, of course, is vessels for a soul or for consciousness. Um, but, a lot of that stuff is hard to verify. And I think it's important to keep an open mind without completely necessarily taking it as gospel. So um, I do think there are signs that point to genetic um, modification by external intelligences to our human species. And I think in time that maybe that will become public knowledge.
beautiful. Awesome. So a lot of what we're talking about is pretty heavy for some people just because for whatever reason they didn't go down the rabbit holes that you are bringing up today. When did you start? At what age where you really started coming out and talking about, information like this? Was it, or was it just like a kind of a gradual thing, or just one day you're like, I'm going to join the Starseed group and start talking? Was that your the first time where you actually just let it all out, or
No, no,
no?
I was talking about this kind of stuff in grade school. In the fourth grade, I was making sketches and trying to design a flying saucer.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh, I don't think I knew
yeah,
that.
I had come up with the idea of having a microwave emitter powered by a nuclear reactor that would resonate uh, in the cavity to create a anti-gravity field, and it was magnesium and bismuth shell. And I think that's so funny because as time has gone on and I've done research, it appears that there are materials like that, and that some principles, like dynamic nuclear spin alignment by Frederick Alzafon, kind of support similar lines of thought. But that I intuitively arrived there, in the fourth grade, um, is silly. I've always been very much questioning the nature of reality, the nature of myself, wanting to understand what I am, what my purpose is, what intentions I have truly, um, and to know myself.
Mm,
So it's been an ongoing thing throughout my entire life, or as long as I can remember, since being exposed to the subject of the paranormal, and being very much invested and interested in it even from a young age.
awesome. with that, we were talking about how you were a diplomat in another lifetime, and now you're trying to kind of rediscover who we are. And it feels like that's the common theme here is coming to this planet. We're trying to find out the truth of who we are as a soul. It's as if we've had all these other lifetimes, and then you come to this place of density and darkness, and it's almost like you're rediscovering who you are without any hints or clues or memories of past lifetimes, at least for most of us, until you're under some type of hypnosis. Um, can you share any recent experiences that you had at a conscious level or a dream state, that you think would be really good for the audience to hear, that could inspire somebody, for what direction humanity might be going into?
Well, I can say this. I mean, maybe we don't necessarily come here with our memories, but there's an internal knowing that there has to be a better way to do things in the way that we've been doing them.
Mm,
Um, within the past year, I had a very, very powerful dream that felt more real than reality. And in this dream, I was in the middle of the desert, and there had been some sort of cataclysm that maybe involved nuclear weapons, is the impression I got. And I was working to try and help people from this cataclysm. And I was working to build this technology to materialize and dematerialize matter through a consciousness-based interface where you could connect through structured consciousness, coherent conscious states to this device and imagine something, and it would be able to be materialized. Um, and in this dream, I remember um, that as I'm trying to help these people out, these beings, these tall beings without any kind of discernible facial features that were humanoid, very skinny and lanky, um, composed out of this golden light, approached me, and they said they basically asked to have permission to intervene on planet Earth in terms of taking care of our governmental structures. And this was conveyed to me in a telepathic sense. And the sense I got was um, to take care of them in sort of a neutralizing them from doing any more harm to the global population, as they've been proven to be really destructive. Um, and to kind of help in a sort of transition of our civilization. Um, and they wanted my permission to do that, and they offered me basically the technology that I was trying to develop. And what I said was, I don't want to agree to that unless humanity um, really gets the free will to determine the direction of its civilization, gets that opportunity. And they agreed to those conditions. They were very much respectful of free will. Um, and so in this dream, I saw this device that they materialized for me. I wrote it down. I made AI generated pictures of the beings and the device that I saw. And I remember, there are these two pylons on the circular platform, and stick your hands down on it, and your consciousness would sort of leave your body, and you could feel the atomic structures and everything around you. Um, and simply you just had to visualize what you wanted to materialize or dematerialize, and the device itself would know how to do it for you and just do it. Um, and I remember the first thing that I did was to dematerialize all the pollution, to clean up the environment, to return balance to our planet in this dream. But I think it's powerful to understand that when we choose to embody a higher state of consciousness in our lives. I mean, no one's perfect. No one's going to go out there and just see love and light. And I think that would be spiritual bypass. I think real higher states of consciousness requires us to be totally and unabashedly honest about ourselves. We have to take a look at ourselves, the good and the ugly, and we have to accept it, and we have to learn to cultivate into what we choose for it to be. Um, and I really think that that is the key. I think that's what matters is what we choose to be in any given moment, and where we choose to go with that, what we choose to build and create with it.
Perfect. Makes a lot of sense to me. And I'm going to end with this question. Being that my podcast is pretty much a place where I want people to reach out so they can express themselves and feel kind of like a sort of like a home or a safe place for them to talk about their personal experiences. And I really want to gravitate as many people as I can for the podcast, but also just for the sake of the person who may have been suppressing some of their own information because they were afraid of getting mocked from their friends, family, coworkers, whoever they knew. What advice would you give to, say, we'll even say the younger crowd who are just having these experiences or having dreams or off-world experiences where they believe that something is happening to them and they just don't feel like, going there? What kind of advice would you give based on how you decided to just consciously come out and talk about it?
I think it's simply it's difficult. Some of these experiences can be traumatic, and um, part of it is from us not understanding it, from the ontological shock of it, from what we project onto the experience. And I think the best way to handle this is to simply be open, compare notes. I hold my experiences that I've had, even with a bit of skepticism. I don't think it is gospel or absolute truth. I think it's important to kind of hold, okay, what other information aligns with this in our world, and what else can I garner when I go inside to explore it. And more than that, I think that it's important that we as a community support each other. The community, different communities that are involved in this, and the UAP topic and the experiencer community, a lot of time it can be hostile. And I don't think that's helpful to getting to the truth. Um, and I think it's important to take everything everyone says with a bit of a grain of salt, and to just um, you know, from there build a mosaic, and not to take it too seriously, not to be like this is the absolute truth,
Right.
um, but rather to be humble about it. This is what I think is happening based on the experiences I've had, and the other things I've heard. And it may be wrong, it may be right in some ways, it may be, and probably is, incomplete. And just um, be open, share. I think the only way we can have true disclosure is when we reflect inwards and we start sharing our experiences with each other, and we're no longer afraid um, to do that, and to be there for each other, to protect each other, and to create community and family in the experiences that we have.
Awesome. All right. Well, that about wraps it up, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Braden, thank you very, very much for coming on to my show, my very first podcast. I hope to have you on again sometime if you're open to it.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, and for all those who are interested in joining me and you want to be in my show, I will try my best to leave a link at the bottom if I figure out this editing tool. And you can click on that link and just reach out to me, and we can talk over the phone at first if you're comfortable with that. And if you really want to chat on the podcast, you're more than welcome to join me. And to my audience, thank you so much for tuning into my frequency. And now we're going to tune out, and I hope to see you again with Adam's Cosmic Family. Bye for now.
Live long and prosper.
Awesome.